Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Donnelly. I'm an alcoholic. I got a little laryngitis tonight, so we'll do our best. Thank you, Lee. By the way, while Lee's standing here, let's give him a round of applause. Seriously, the Tapers and Alcoholics Anonymous do a great service to our fellowship. They don't get anywhere near the credit that they deserve. I think Angie mentioned that yesterday or today. And the reality is that because of people like Lee, I can hear guys like Chuck C., who passed before I got into the program, or a couple of gentlemen that I met that are heroes to me, guys like Keith Lewis and Sandy Beach. I still get the honor to listen to their message. And if you're new here tonight, like Victoria or Andrew, stop by that booth, look at some of those, pick them up, listen to them. It's amazing. So thank you, Lee. I want to thank Emma and the committee, Frank, the folks that have been so kind to me while I've been here. It's been a pleasure. You guys have a really enthusiastic crowd. I think, man, Victor and Nazoon and Cliff and Angie, all the speakers have been fantastic. I can't wait for tomorrow morning. But I got to tell you, the talk of the weekend for me was Ned. I mean, he killed it with the golf stuff, didn't he? I was moved to tears. It grabbed me. There's a special place. It was really good. So I got a little confused. I didn't know if it was 12 steps or 18 holes. I don't know, but either way, it was just really beautiful. There's a gentleman here tonight and his wife that I also want to thank, and that's Brian and Robin M. And I'm here tonight because of what Brian did. 28 years ago, I was standing in a hallway at my work where Brian and I worked together. And Brian was not just a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but something that I've come to distinguish between. He wasn't just a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Brian was a step-working member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I crash landed in this hallway, there was a gentleman who stood behind me and asked me if I was okay as I was contemplating suicide. And I was trying to figure out a way how I could leave the planet without my mom knowing it was suicide, because it would have destroyed my mother to have that happen. And from behind me, I heard this voice. And it was a voice I had heard for the last 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. And it was a question that I've been asked my whole life, and that's, Mike, are you okay? And I always had some snarky, smart-alecky answer for that question. I've always had some snippy thing to say. And I have no idea why I answered him in July of 1991, no, man, I'm not okay. But he was there. And he brought me to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he brought me a book that saved my life, because through that book and the actions that are contained in it, by following them under the guidance of a sponsor, I found a God who saved my life. And I owe that man everything. His name is Brian. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you. That's the truth. I was born and raised in Chicago. My dad is absolutely still to the day my hero. He was a Korean War veteran, served multiple tours of duty in Korea, and came back to the Chicago area and became a police officer, quickly rose through the ranks. He was a lieutenant, so he had to live in the city. My mom was a waitress and a caterer, and just a marvelous lady, a loving lady, hilarious, just had a great, if you know Irish Catholic mothers, I mean, that is exactly who my mom was, right? Heart of gold and a fist of iron, man. She had it's the perfect combination, you know? And she was great, and she would get very frustrated with her kids. She smoked Vantage 100s. Anybody remember Vantage 100? Yeah, they were like the longest cigarette in the history of cigarettes. We used to steal smokes from my mom, walk around the south side of Chicago. Very tough to be cool when you're smoking a Vantage 100 from your mother. She was like a professional smoker too, man. She could take like 2 puffs of those bad boys, they were done. The ash, she'd never flick the ash, so it was like hanging on the end of the cigarette. And then, and she would like get mad at me, she'd get frustrated with me, but she would never exhale. So she'd be like, what are you doing? And it was like, smoke would be like coming out of her mouth as she spoke. It's awesome. It's awesome. So when I was 6 years old, I had just turned 6 years old, and my father didn't come home from work that day. An artery broke in his bowel. And he laid basically in a hospital bed for about 10 days at the age of 42 and hemorrhaged to death. And everything in my life changed. Everything in my sister's life changed. I have one sister. Her name is Patty, next to my beautiful bride, Marcia, who's in South Dakota tonight. Patty's probably my best friend on the planet. And my mom, everything changed for my mom. She was 33 years old. She was about 90 days or so into a new 30-year mortgage. Had no idea how to raise 2 kids by herself. She was a trooper. Absolutely fantastic people that I come from. My family's Irish Catholic, so we're genetically incapable of not celebrating any holidays at all. You were talking about that, Victor, right? And it's true, like we had people in the backyard, always having barbecues, always having people over for whatever it was. And celebration and song were always part of our life. And I don't know, there was something really that was subtracting when my dad passed. My dad was a guy that you felt secure around. My dad was one of these leaders that could walk into a room and everybody would be quiet and everybody would look at him and listen for what Lefty had to say. At least that's my interpretation. That's what I remember about him, right? And I remember wanting to be just like him. My dad was a man of integrity and honor. My dad was a man of virtue. My dad took care of his family, and I did none of those things. We'll get into that in a few minutes. When I was 12 years old, I had a lot of rage built up inside of me. I didn't really know how to talk about that. I didn't really know what it was. I certainly wouldn't have called it that back when I was a little kid. But through the process of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps that are in, I began to see what that was, and I was angry at things. And what happened was I began to push back and rebel. And if you told me to go right, I went left. If you told me to go left, I went right. That's just how I operated. And I don't even know why I did it. I didn't want to go the opposite direction. It was almost like I just wanted to be in juxtaposition to you. I almost wanted to shove back at authority a little bit. And again, I don't know where that came from. It's certainly not what my mom and dad taught me. But that's how it was. And by the time I was 12 years old, you just couldn't talk to me. I was just an emotional kid. I was a bit of a wreck. I was kind of the fidgety kid in school, right? Couldn't sit still, right? Always throwing paper wads at somebody or dinking around, right? Always had some snarky, smart-alecky comment for a teacher or a principal. But all in good fun. I always had that Irish smile that could kind of get me out of a bunch of crap, you know? And one day I'm in the park after a baseball game, it was a Little League baseball game, and I got my uniform on, and my other friends do as well. And one of the coolest looking guys I have ever seen in my entire life came up to us. He had long hair to his mid-back. He had a bandana on with a roach clip, like a peacock feather hanging off the back end of it, right? He had a Black Doors concert t-shirt on and faded bell-bottom jeans. And he looked at us and he said, do you guys get high? And we really had, we knew what that meant, but we really were kind of scared, like we were 12 or 13 years old. He was probably 17 or 18 years old. That spread kind of intimidated us a little bit. And so we didn't say anything. We just sat there. And he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out what appeared to be a joint and a lighter, and he chucked it in my buddy's lap. And my buddy grabbed that thing and he lit it up and he started passing it around a circle. And I thought, I guess I'm getting high today. Like I guess that's what's going to happen, I guess. And I remember thinking to myself, right, because I am intensely insecure. I'm scared about everything, absolutely everything. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do this wrong, So I'm thinking to myself, like, what's the difference between smoking Vantage 100s and like the only two things that came to me was when you hold a joint, you hold it like this, but when you hold a cigarette, you hold it like that. Huge difference. I think we can all agree there. And then the other thing is, like, when you smoke cigarettes, you exhale right away, but when you're apparently smoking a joint, you're supposed to hold it in. And, like, do not cough on your dope smoke. I remember hearing that one around. Right. So I'm like, don't be a loser, don't choke, So this thing's coming around, right? Pass it, take a look, move on. Didn't get high, didn't get stoned, didn't eat a bag of Doritos, didn't stare at a black-light Jimi Hendrix poster, like nothing happened. And literally 24 hours later, I'm walking down the alley on the south side of Chicago, and a buddy of mine's coming the other way, and he goes, hey, Mike, do you get high? Well, now with all my drug-using experience, right? I confidently looked at him and said, yeah, dude, I get high. And, So he pulls out what appears to be a joint and a lighter, and we smoked that thing. And I got to tell you, we ate a lot of Doritos and stared at his older brother's black-light Jimi Hendrix poster all afternoon. And I had no idea, but that was the start of a thing. That was the start of a deal for me, right? And for the next few years, if you could light it on fire, I was probably smoking it. And by the time I was about 16 years old or so, a couple of things happened. Number one is we got wheels. We could move around the city a little bit, right? My friends had some cars, and so if we needed to get booze, we'd go out to the suburbs or we'd go into the inner city. Either side would sell you, but your own neighborhood was really difficult to get booze. You needed an older brother. You needed some party so you could steal it from the party or whatever. But when we got wheels, we could move around a little bit. Now, I talked about drugs, but I want to be very, very clear. I do not consider myself a drug addict. I consider myself an alcoholic. In my head, I have kind of two lists, right? So the first list are things I've used in my life to avoid me looking at me, right? Dope's on that list. But man, a lot of stuff's on that list, right? Spending money, watching TV, being a zealot at work, being a sloth at work, right? Creating reputation for myself I don't deserve. There's a whole kinds of stuff on this list, right? I have another list, and those are the things that have made me feel whole. Alcohol's on that list. And there's only one other thing on that list, and that's the God I found through the work of the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was 16, 17 years old, I was always the kid. The drugs kind of went away. I saw other kids in my area. I've never had a desire to stick a needle in my arm or put something up my nose. That's just never been appealing to me. But I got to tell you, hanging out in that 3 to 4 beer buzz, man, that's heaven on earth to me. Right? The music's a little louder and a little better. Somehow I know the lyrics to the song, right? I have a full head of hair and one chin. Like, life is good, right? Life is good right there, right there. And I want to stay there. I just can't. And I've never been able to. I was the 16, 17-year-old kid that was passing out in back seats of cars, waking up on his front lawn with his mother scared to death, wondering where the hell I'd been all night, right? Saying stupid things to pretty girls at parties, not knowing their big tough boyfriends on the other side of the room, right? I mean, that's just how it is with me. Booze makes me feel like I presumed you felt, right? It makes me believe, for some reason, that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. That's the effect that alcohol gave me. Every time. I got this every time I drank, from the very beginning, until I met Brian in that hallway. I got this from booze. Man, it was just like it let the air out of that thing. I was so full of rage and anxiety and confusion and fear. And I'm not talking about being drunk either. I'm talking about just a couple of belts, right? I missed 42 days of school my senior year in high school. I went on to college. It was a small Catholic school in the suburbs of Chicago. Drank my way out of there in a year and a half. Moved back home with my ma. And all hell fell up. I mean, it was just hell. It was just crazy. I got a crappy job, then a less crappy job, then a less crappy job. Finally, I raised up to a bad job, right? And that process went on. And one day a friend of mine called me. And he said, hey, there's this company, and they're interviewing out in Bolingbrook, Illinois. You should go out and try your hand, just throw your deal in there. And my recollection is they needed 32 sales reps. That number, whatever that was, I don't know. That's the number in my head, but you're looking at number 32. I guarantee if 33 people had applied, I don't know where my story would go, but it wouldn't go this way. So this guy gives me a break. And I start working for him, and I remember, some people are born with chips on their shoulder, right? They feel a little insecure. I was born with a chunk on my shoulder. Like, I feel like I have to do twice the work as everyone else just to be even with them. I feel like I have to shoot the mark by 10 miles in order to just be the same as everybody else, right? And so I frantically run at this, and I remember them offering training programs. My arm would go out of the socket, because I remember sitting there feeling in this training how different I was from everybody else. They all had college degrees, right? They were all smarter than me. They were all whatever I thought they were. And then there was me. So I worked really, really hard, and I took all the training that I could, and I tried to apply it as best I could, and it turns out I was pretty good at sales. And I did really well at that job, and I feel very blessed to have had that job. And as time went on, I got promoted, and I got different things that kind of threw my way a little bit. I won a national sales award one year. And we were all at this party, and they had a pool out at this hotel. I don't remember the name of the hotel. It was on the south side of Chicago somewhere. And I don't know, we all met at the pool at like noon. And I started pulling some brews, right? And then there was a pre-party, and I went to that. Then there was a cocktail party, and I went to that. And then there was the dinner. And I remember thinking, there's a lot of VPs at this. There's a lot of like really important people in our organization at this thing. And like, how can I look like they look? How can I be like them? And I remember thinking, all business people drink Manhattans. I have no idea why I thought that. So I start slamming Manhattans after all day of drinking. And I remember I went up and I had a fiance that was with me, and a good lady. And I hurt her so bad with my selfishness, you know. And I had 3 or 4 Manhattans because they were going to shut the bar down. I wanted to make sure I could get through dinner, you know, and I had to get this award, and really have no idea what I even said when I got up to get the award. It's kind of blacked out a little bit. I have little pockets of memory through that evening. And I remember the end of the evening, I was just absolutely beyond myself. And I had embarrassed myself, embarrassed my company, certainly my fiance at the time. I didn't really know how I was going to walk into work on Monday, and so what I did was I just pretended like it was a joke, right? Hey, wasn't that great? Yeah, that was fun, right? And I'm trying to ask people questions to figure out what actually took place. Anybody remember those days? It was terrible. It was terrible. Came into work one morning. It was about 7 o'clock, and Brian knew something was up because I was never there at 7 o'clock, and I hadn't gone to bed. I had drank all night. He put his arm around me. He didn't scold me. He didn't call me names. He didn't belittle me. He said, you should call in sick. You should leave work right now. And I said, no, dude, I got to stay. And he said, well, go in the cafeteria and get some breath mints and don't leave your desk. Like, he covered for me, helped me out. I had nowhere to go. And this member of Alcoholics Anonymous took me under his wing at one of my worst spots, and he helped me. Right? Fast forward now to that hallway. Right? The fiance was gone. My family didn't really want to talk to me very much. I had a lot of financial problems. I really had a hard time with banks. I didn't like banks. Somebody was talking about that this weekend. I didn't like financial institutions. It just, so I'd never opened up any accounts, right? I would go to take my check, right, from this big company I was working at, feeling all impressed, right? And I'd run to the currency exchange and pay them to cash my check, right? Having a bank account just seemed like a commitment, you know, like a long-term commitment. I just wasn't ready for that kind of thing, you know? I just was lost. I was a lost person. I went through this whole thing where when I got transferred to South Dakota, Brian met me in this hallway and he asked me if I wanted to go to a meeting, and I lied to him and told him yeah. And we went to this meeting, and it was a Lamont Oaks group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Palos Park, Illinois. And if you're ever in that area, look that up. It's a great Monday night meeting. It's fantastic. And they used to have a newcomers meeting before the regularly scheduled AA meeting. And in the regularly scheduled AA meeting, the newcomers would take their red chairs, which they sat in that newcomers meeting, across the hall and bring them into this gymnasium. And there was probably 70 to 80 new people at this thing. And there was probably 200, 250 in this regular meeting. And the reason that you sat in red chairs was so that the people who were not new would know that you're a new person. And they would come up to you and they would ask you, like, do you have a sponsor? Do you need a meeting schedule? Do you have a big book? Right? It was fantastic. And I get transferred to South Dakota and there's no red chairs. There's no newcomer meetings. Right? There's no gymnasium stuff. Like, it's totally different. AA, it's completely wrong, you know? And I'm living in this place because I have no money. Like, I'm making money, but I don't have any money, right? And I used to think that if I made more money, that would solve my money problems. And that's not true, right? If I continue to spend $300 to $500 more than the money I make, I'll always have money problems. I didn't know that at the time. It sounds easy, and I was not a smart kid. And so I'm living in this absolute, by the way, my home group, if you're ever in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, please come look us up. We meet on Thursday nights at 7 o'clock till 8:30. We live stream our meetings, so you can listen to us online if you'd like. It's a speaker meeting. It's called the Treasure Map Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we get that name from Sandy B's line, where Sandy would say that the big book is not the treasure. God is the treasure. Right? The big book is a treasure map. Follow the treasure map to find the treasure. So we named our meeting after that. And so if you come to Sioux Falls, I would encourage you, there's a lot of places to stay. Do not stay at the place I was staying at. It's called the Knights Inn. And if the fleas didn't get you, the felons would. It was a bad place. It was ugly. And in the front office, they had a Western Union deal. And Brian would Western Union me money so I could pay the weekly rate and get through the week. And I'd get my check in the mail at a post office box because renting an apartment was another long-term commitment I was really afraid of. And I'd go down to the currency exchange and I'd pay the money and I'd get my check cash and then I'd wire Brian his money back. And we played ping pong with money for months. And he kept saying, go to meetings, go to meetings, go to meetings. And so I would try, and I would go to these meetings, and along the way I met a guy named Joe Friday. And Joe changed my life. Joe became my sponsor. I said to Joe one night while we sat in his truck, Joe is very different than me. Very, very different than me. Joe was a cowboy kind of. He was a construction worker cowboy kind of. He wore like those pointed boots that cowboys wear, you know. He wore the Western shirts with like the snap buttons, you know. His teeth were a little brown from chewing tobacco. But the one thing that I got from Joe was this, is when I'd sit in a meeting and I wouldn't know what they said, I wouldn't understand what you were saying to me. I could go to Joe and say, what do they mean by that? And Joe could translate for me. He could just say it in a way that I understood it. And I felt really connected to him. And I asked him to sponsor me, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, let's go to coffee, and I'll tell you my story, and you can tell me your story. And at the end of that, if we think we can work together, I'll sponsor you. So we go to this place called the Crackpot. How ironic, I know. This place called the Crackpot is a little coffee joint. And we're sitting there chugging coffee and chain smoking, and Joe tells me his story. And I didn't hear any of it because I was writing my own as he was talking. Anybody ever have that experience? Wanted to make sure I said it right, you know. And I told him my story as best I could come up with it. And about 5 to 6 sentences in there, he just abruptly cut me off. And he said, kid, you have no idea what alcoholism is, do you? I'm sober probably 3 months or so, somewhere in there, maybe 4. And I said, well, yeah, it's when you're drunk a lot. It's like when you drink, you're drunk a lot. He said something that absolutely changed the way I view Alcoholics Anonymous, recovery, and certainly alcoholism. He said, Mike, alcoholism has nothing to do with drunkenness. And I looked at him, very similar to the way some of you are looking at me right now. I didn't get it. He said, Mike, alcoholism is a threefold disease. It's a physical allergy to alcohol, it's a mind that lies to you, and it's all about the broken soul that you have. And I wasn't following him. He could read my face. He knew it. Now, I'm really new. And the one thing that Joe had over me was a tremendous amount of book knowledge and a tremendous amount of tradition knowledge and a tremendous amount of AA service commitment knowledge. He didn't use any of that. You know what he did? He talked to me by his heart. And he asked me questions like, Mike, have you ever gone out and gotten drunk when you really didn't want to? And I went, oh man, you just described the last 8 months or maybe a year and a half of my drinking. I don't know about anybody in this room, but all the hell that I reaped upon myself and others, especially in that latter part of my drinking, I wanted none of it. I wanted nothing like that to ever take place to the people that I loved and cared about, let alone have my hand be the one that drew it upon them. And I'd look at them with tears running down my face sometimes, and I'd say, I'm sorry. And although they sort of knew I meant it, sorry was no longer enough. It was no longer enough. There were times I would go out, I don't know about you, but I know about me, when I did not want to get drunk. The hell that had happened yesterday or the week before or the month before, I did not want repeated. Just wanted to go out with my friends and be normal. And when I would start drinking, I would end up insanely drunk and more hell upon me and the people I love. I didn't want that. I had no idea why that happened to me. I thought something was morally wrong with me, or that for some reason I was weak-willed. It just sort of exacerbated some of the insecurities I already had going on in my head. I had no idea that this body, that this physiology was sick. I had no idea of that. And Joe knew I didn't understand who Dr. Silkworth was. He just talked to me. He just talked to me. And he talked to me man to man and heart to heart. And as he told me more about his story and how he dealt with that allergy, I could connect with it, even though I didn't have book knowledge. He said, Mike, do you have this allergy? When you start drinking, do you have an inability to control the amount you take? I had to concede that point. Yeah, I got that. And I'm by the way, I'm really ashamed of that. It still feels, when I'm sitting across the table from him, like this is my fault. Like somehow I willed me into this. Right? And what he said? He said, we'll deal with fault later. Let's just deal with reality right now. Do you have the allergy? And I said, yeah. He said, good. He said, the reason we're going to go through these 3 parts is so that you can ask yourself, so that you can take your personal experience and you can throw it up what Alcoholics Anonymous says an alcoholic is, and you can ask yourself that question. Are you one or are you not one? And if you are, that's great news, Mike, because we have a solution for that. And if once you learn what AA says an alcoholic is, if you throw that up against your personal experience and you're not one, that's great news too. There's no wrong answer here. What matters is honesty. But he looked at me and he said, but the one thing I won't have you do is not know what that means and make you feel guilty for not going to meetings. Look, if you're an alcoholic and you have the disease of alcoholism, we have a solution for you. If you don't, you don't. Maybe something else is wrong. Maybe I can help you in another way. Maybe there's somebody I can put you in contact with to work through some of that stuff. But he qualified me. And he didn't make me feel bad for not knowing. I didn't know. How could I know? No one had ever told me. You got the allergy, he says? I said, yeah. He said the second part, Mike, and I didn't know he was talking about the chapter more about alcoholism. I couldn't do that. I had no idea. And he went through questions about my mind and how it worked before that first drink, the things I thought of. And I don't know about anybody in this room, but I got to tell you, my wolves come to me disguised as sheep. My alcoholism never said, Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to say terrible things to people you love. Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to spend more money than you have. Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to make yourself look like a complete idiot and do things to people you care about that will embarrass you and hurt them. It never said that to me once. You know what it said to me? Things like this. Dude, you're 24 years old. What, are you never going to go out again? You know what? Leave at halftime. You know what? Take $20 with you to the bar, not 60. You know what? Have Emma drive, right? I had all these things lined up. It never told me the truth. He said, Mike, do you have a mind that lies to you? And I said, yeah. And he goes, slow down, kid. I got to be honest with you. I've watched you now for a little month or two, maybe 6 weeks, you running around these meetings. I got news for you. I think that your mind lies to you about a lot more than just booze. You know, and he's right. My mind lied to me about your religion. And my mind lied to me about your race. And my mind lied to me about your income level. See, if your family was wealthy, that meant you must have done something wrong to get the wealth. Right? I drank my way out of college, so if you had a degree, I thought you were better than me. Right? If you had any swag to you at all, I thought you were an arrogant punk. He said something to me that, again, just clarified it. He said, the busiest place on planet Earth is your mind as you walk through the mall. Because you are judging every human being that walks the opposite way of you. And it was like he cracked me open and could read what was going on inside of my head. I had no idea I was even doing that. It didn't matter. I mean, you name whatever would separate us. Whatever would separate us, I was judging you by my position. It just was. I didn't even know I was doing it. It was so natural. I just did it. My head was so loud, and here was a man sat across this table from me having coffee, who told me all about it. He said, Mike, do you have an allergy to alcohol? I said, yeah. He said, well, the good news is that's part of alcoholism, and if you have that at the end of this conversation, we have a solution for that. But the bad news is we're not doctors in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're not nurses, and we cannot fix your body. So if you have the allergy to alcohol, you're going to have that till the day you die, kid. We got big eyes. Then he said, your mind that's lying to you, that's telling you stories, that's messing you up all the time. He says, and again, I don't know how it is down here just in South Dakota. Contrary to popular belief, Mike, we are not therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. That's not what we do here. We can't fix your brain. So if your mind is screwed up and your body is screwed up, we can't help those things. And I was like, this is supposed to be a program of hope, right? But he said another thing to me that really changed the way I look at things. And he said, Alcoholics Anonymous is not a message of hope. Not a message of hope. Never has been, never will be. He said what Alcoholics Anonymous is a message of hopelessness, followed by a message of hope. Mike, because if you don't know you're screwed, you won't do the work. I was like, wow. I knew he was right. I took every corner and cut every angle I possibly could my whole life. Why would this be any different unless I was absolutely in the pit? And I was in the pit. The only way I knew that my foot was in that bear trap was when I tried to get out of it. The only time I recognized that I couldn't quit drinking is when I tried to. The only time I realized that my soul was so messed up that I couldn't quit lying to people for absolutely no reason, even when they're for no reason, is when I tried to tell the truth. He said, Mike, the only thing we work on in Alcoholics Anonymous is the third part, your broken soul. That's the only thing we work on. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. And most of the work is simply this, getting out of the way and not working on it. I was like, okay, there's one of those things. I just didn't get what he was talking about at all. But he said to me, hey, if you have the disease of alcoholism, and that's your call, not mine, right? And if you don't have it, we can always be friends. And if you do have it, we can always be friends. But if you do have it and you're willing to do the work, I'll sponsor you. And I said, sure, I'll do the work. I really didn't have much of an idea of what that was. I had seen the steps on the wall, but I didn't really know what the work entailed. And so he said, tell me about God. And I said, well, he must be big and he must be nice. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, well, look, when I go outside, I can kind of, there's stuff that's bigger than me out there, right? Like the sky and the stars and everything. And like, if all that's like bigger than me, then God must be bigger than that because he made that. So he must be big. And he's like, good. And he said, he must be nice. Why? And I said, well, look, I know I sort of don't deserve a second chance, but I can kind of tell sort of inside of me that he's given me one. He said, good, kid. We got on our hands and knees and we said the third step prayer. And I'm going to zip through this part because to me it's important, but I want to cover it. I want to do it. We got on our hands and knees, and when we were down there, after we said the third step prayer, he said, don't believe for a second that the third step is a prayer, because it's not. Only a prayer. The third step is a prayer that declares, Mike, your willingness to work 4 through 12. That's what that's about. So when we get up, we're going to start the fourth step. Okay, I said. So we knelt down, we said the third step prayer together, we got up, and sure enough, he handed me a piece of paper and a pen. And he said, write down your resentments, your fears, and your sex conduct. And at the right spot, say the prayers that are attached to those three things. It's interesting in resentments, we talk a lot, at least in South Dakota, about this idea that we're supposed to pray for people we resent. And believe me, you won't ever get me to talk you out of praying for somebody you resent. I think that's fine, that's good. But our book asks me to pray for me when I resent them, as if I'm the chief victim of my own resentment. It says, God, save me from being angry. Show me how I might be helpful to that person. That was a very different way to look at that for me. There's prayers about fear. We ask God to relieve our fears, and at once it says we outgrew fear. That was it. Sex. After I did my sex inventory, Joe and I went back through it. Right? On page 69 there's some questions I'm supposed to continue to ask myself. First one is, what should I have done instead? And I wrote all that down. And then I was to go back through that. And from the things I should have done instead, begin to shape a sane and sound ideal for my future sex life. And I did that. On page 70, there's prayers about that. Prayers for sanity, strength to do the right thing. Right? I mean, there's such a thing as sexual sanity. My sponsor told me that Bill Wilson will never ask us to pray for something that doesn't exist. So I began to pray. I went to this guy and I gave my fifth step to him. And at the end of the fifth step, he was a Catholic priest. It was 6 hours. I'm a Catholic guy, so it's one Catholic to another, and I'm sitting there telling him stuff, and 6 hours of this. And at the end of it, he looks at me and he says, can I ask you a question? And I'm like, sure, Father, but it's been 6 hours. I got to go. Can we speed this up a little bit? It's kind of my attitude at that point. And he looked me square in the eye, and from one Catholic to another, he asked me a question I didn't know an answer to. He said, Mike, what's your problem with Jesus? Which is a fine question to ask a Catholic, especially one like me who never goes to church, never done anything. And I don't know how you guys are, I just know about me. And if you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I feel morally obligated to make something up on the spot to sound intelligent. Anybody with me on that? Everybody who didn't raise their hand, think about that. So I said, I'll tell you what my problem is, Father, right? I mean, I was raised in this deal. 8 years of Catholic grammar school, 4 years of Catholic high school, right? I know all about the stuff, right? All about God, who God is. I know all about that, right? And I know what you're going to do. I'll tell you my problem. I'll tell you my problem to answer your question. What's my problem with Jesus? Here's my problem. I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous now for like 5 months. Pretty seasoned veteran of the whole thing right now. And if you take the big book and you pinch it together, it's like that big. All right, I know what you're going to do. You're going to take the Bible, which is like that big. Which, by the way, just as a sign of reference here, I've never seen a Bible that thick. I'm just being honest with you. But anyways, so you're going to take a Bible which is like that big, and you're going to whack that off my head. Right? I got news for you, Father. If I can't do that right, no way can I do this. And his head fell in his hands. And he came up and he looked at me, and I swear to you, he had a tear in his eye. And he did the same sarcastic little thing right back to me. And he said, Mike, this isn't the story of what you do for God. Mike, this is the story of what God has done for you. And in that moment, something moved in me, and I have no idea what it was at that time. I didn't know what he was talking about. I had no concept of what he was saying to me. What he was really saying to me is that, Mike, you cannot ever once earn God's love. Not at all. That God loves you because of who God is. God doesn't love you because of who you are. I didn't understand that. I didn't catch that. So I went back to my sponsor, we sat down and we said the 6th and 7th step prayer together. Grabbed a piece of paper, wrote out an 8th step, prayed for the willingness to make those amends, and I went out to make amends. He said something to me that was very, very powerful. He said, Mike, you went out of your way to harm these people. You need to go out of your way to make it right. See, I was in a meeting one time and I heard one lady talk about this one experience that she had this one time. About how she was walking through the mall and someone in 3rd grade had walked past her and she was mean to that 3rd grader. And so she went up to her and she's like, hey, I'm sorry I was mean to you in 3rd grade. And it was an amazing experience, and she was weeping in this meeting about the freedom she found, right? And so I really believed that like somehow I would be in Sioux Falls and all the people I had harmed in Chicago were going to be on some bus trip coming through the heartland. And they would just be there miraculously. Joe had a very different feel of that one. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get in your car on Friday after work, and I want you to drive to Chicago. And I want you to make amends to people all day Saturday and on Sunday, and then I want you to get back in your car on Sunday afternoon and drive back to Sioux Falls because you have to be at work on time Monday morning. And I did that for months. And the first 2 trips were horrible. I hated them. But what happened is that freedom began to come to me in those promises, the one on this banner. I think we get a new freedom and a new happiness by applying the first 9 steps to our life. And when I began to do that, I began to experience a new freedom. Not this freedom, but a new freedom. Something very different. And I suddenly wanted to go back. And I suddenly wanted to make things right. I mean, I paid off $40,000 in credit card debt. That was pizza and beer money, man. There was no big screen TV or anything cool on it at all. It was late fees and high interest charges. That's exactly what it was. I didn't file federal income tax for 3 years prior to joining Alcoholics Anonymous or Illinois state tax. I found an accountant in the program and he helped me through all that stuff. And 3.5 years later, I was free of that, paying every single month. And there were months in there. The only 2 checks I ever wanted to send was the first one, so I could tell Joe I was doing it, and the last one, so I could be free of it. But I'm telling you, every single month in between there, if you'd have done the math with me, it wasn't going to work. I was going to run out of money by the 17th or 18th of the month. It wasn't going to work. It worked every single time. And the freedom didn't come until the stupid check got in the mailbox. It was agonizing and panic and all the rest of it until it hit the mailbox. And then somehow things would scatter out and be okay. I just needed to commit to the work and commit to completing it as best I could. Not perfect, but as best I could. I wrote a letter to my father. And I told him, I said, Dad, I went to his gravesite and I said, Dad, you were a man of honor and you had integrity. And I had none of that. And I'm sorry for damaging your name. And I love you. And I've always wanted to be like you, and I've never felt like I ever measured up to that. And I don't know what happened. The sky didn't open. I didn't see my dad. There was no magical, mystical thing that took place, but I left that gravesite feeling closer to my dad than I ever have in my entire life. And I felt like in some way he was with me, and he loved me, and he was proud of me. I don't even know if any of that's true. Because you can't prove it. But I don't care if you can prove it. I know that I feel it. I know that it changed the way I looked at life. I went to my mom, and I used to break into her front room window and steal money out of her purse and booze out of her fridge. And if you have an Irish Catholic mother, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My mom never locked the window. Right? Not once. And when I went to her and I told her that, what can I do to make this right? She didn't have much to say. And I went back to Joe and I said, I made amends to my mom and it didn't go very well. He said, what do you mean very well? I said, well, I don't know. He said, you want feelings from this, right? This is still about you, Mike. Like, you want to feel good about this. You're supposed to be a son. The problem with you and your mom is that you think you had a bad mom. The reality is she had a bad son. And you have no idea how to be a son. So we're going to teach you. And the first thing he did, he said, when you go home at Thanksgiving, I want you to put your arms around your mom and hug her. My mom and I didn't do that. I went home at Thanksgiving, put my arms around my mom. She did this. She got nervous. She got scared. Right? She didn't feel comfortable at all. He said, when you go back at Christmas, do the same thing. And I did that. In the meantime, I was calling her every week, and he told me, call her every week and ask her 2 questions. The first question is, Mom, how was your week? And the second question is, wow, that sounds interesting. Could you tell me more about that? No matter what she says in answer to the first question. He goes, but early on, like, she still thinks you're the thief breaking into her window, man. You haven't proved anything to her yet. Let her have the freedom to think you're still a moron. It's okay. And the first few calls were exactly what he said. They were hard. I'd call her up and I would say, "How you doing, Ma? How was your week?" "Fine." "Wow, that sounds interesting. Could you tell me more about that?" "Really fine?" But I kept calling and kept calling and kept calling, and a weird thing happened over a series of months. Her answers got a lot longer. And I'll tell you something that's even weirder. I began to care about the answers after a while. You see, and before my own eyes, the magic of step 8 and 9 transformed me from a guy who came here to not drink into a son. If you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, thank you for being here tonight. But don't believe that we're here for just sobriety. Sobriety is a great gift. I mock it at none, zero. It's a wonderful thing. But there is so much more. If I would have settled for sobriety alone, I would have missed being a son. Would have missed being a son. So I'm back at St. Patrick's Day. A few months of doing this. And Joe said, "Go hug your mom." And I can bring you into the spot. I can bring you into the place in the house. If you walk in my front door on the south side of Chicago, in the home that I grew up on, you walk right through is the kitchen, about 4 steps in, make it right down the hallway where there's a T. And at that spot, on St. Patrick's Day weekend, in 1992, I went and hugged my mom, and I felt her arms come up from behind me. And my mom hugged me for the first time in I don't know how long. Not because she was a bad mother, but because I was a bad son. Step 8 and 9, to me, is where God puts these fractured parts of our soul back together. And unless I'm willing to go make those things right, maybe He can. He's God. He can do whatever He wants. But if I recognize how broken I really am and how much I need Him, and I have countless people before me in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous to tell me work 1 through 9, like finish it, and I won't do it, I might be missing the very opportunity that God is offering me to put my life back together. Maybe. I don't want to risk that. When I was out there drinking, I hurt a number of ladies, very selfishly. And if you're in a room this size, there's some lady out there, or maybe more than one, I don't know, who's probably been hurt by a selfish guy. And if you're out there tonight, I want to tell you I'm sorry on behalf of all selfish guys. Making amends to the ladies that I hurt changed the way I look at ladies. Didn't really understand it at the time. I didn't really know what was going on. But I needed to do that. I needed to go to those people. Right? Like, sometimes we talk about this in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we kind of giggle about it, and it's fine, I guess. I don't know if it's fine or not, but we kind of do, right? And, I got to tell you, there are many options on consensual selfishness, right? Like, there's really only one thing where consensual selfishness is apparently okay. If we were going to rob someone together, and the victim was totally okay with it, and I went to my sponsor, and I'm like, "Hey, I got this great gig," right? "No, the victim's in on it. It's okay. It's consensual selfishness." He'd be like, "Get over here right now." Look, I'm not the arbiter of anybody's anything. I'm just telling you that I needed to let God into this part of my life. And I needed to help Him. I needed to get out of the way so He could help me become the man that He wanted me to be. I think. To me, step 10, 11, we talked about it a little earlier. It's the whole thing, man. It's the moment-to-moment living. The 1 through 9 might clean up my past, but 10 and 11 is how I think I'm supposed to live right now. And if I can stay right here and not get distracted by all of these thoughts, these fear thoughts, these resentment thoughts, these confusion thoughts, these insecurity thoughts, if I can just stay here, then maybe I can be with God right now. Because that's where God is, right? He's with us right now. He's not in another banquet room. He's not on the golf course. He's right here. And if I can get that distraction out of my way, and I can just be with him here, I got a shot at something pretty spectacular. And I think what that is tied to step 11. I think that God's will for me, the book tells me, I'm in the world to play the role that he assigns. And when I look at my life objectively, I see some things that he's assigned to me. I'm a husband. I'm a husband whether my wife is with me or not. I'm a husband all the time. What should a husband do? It's a good question. I'm a father, stepfather. I have 2 boys, Kyle and Cody, some of the finest men you'd ever meet in your entire life. I have this absolutely beautiful daughter-in-law. Her name is Teresa. She's a genius. She's a genius. She's so lovely. That's one of the roles. I have father-in-law as part of my role. How am I supposed to treat her? What am I supposed to do with her? How am I supposed to love her? At least for me, these are important questions. Cody and Teresa have been married a long time now, and they have 3 kids. Grace Elizabeth, Hank Michael, and Rose Catherine. How about that for an Irish name? Rose. Oh my gosh. And they're the most spectacular 3 little people you've ever seen in your entire life. I'm Bappa. All right? That's one of the roles God has given me, is to be Bappa. So Thursday, when I knew I was flying out, because I love to see them every weekend, and I do see them every weekend that I'm there in town. And I went over there on Thursday before my home group, and they're eating dinner. I said, "Why are you here, Bappa?" It's because Bappa's going away this weekend and he won't be able to see you. And Bappa's heart breaks when he can't see you on the weekends. Bappa's got to go tell some people that God loves them. Okay, Bappa, you go tell them. Right? They're amazing kids. But see, if the only way I can really love them, I think, these are thinks now, is to try as best I can to be present to God in the moment, somewhat sort of prayerfully maybe, and just to sort of let him fill me in the moment so that I can bring him to them. I think my job in Alcoholics Anonymous, this idea of praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out, is about conduit. It's about letting God fill me so he can love those people around me by using me. No one else is called to be my wife's husband except me. I'm the only one she's got. Pray for her. But I'm the only one she's got. I'm the only stepdad Kyle and Cody are ever going to have. I'm the only father-in-law, please God, my daughter-in-law is ever going to have. And by trying to stay right here and listen to them and trying to stay right here, and I got to tell you, if my challenge with this is staying right here. It's so hard. Because my head's still doing the same stuff. So I'm sitting with Cody and we're talking about marriage and prayer and how to have God, just all kinds of things about life. And my head's going, tell him this, tell him that, tell him the other, tell him, and I'm not listening to him. So I had to learn to be here with him right now. And so as he's talking to me, I'm saying this prayer, God, help me just be here with him. Help me just love him. Help me just be whatever it is you want me to be for him right now. Whatever that is, and help me do it if I'm supposed to do something. Most times it's shut up and listen. And if he's saying something to me that you can tell is important to him, praying for that right then. Well, Teresa and I are doing this, or we're going here, or I'm getting a new job. God, help me have that new job, whatever you want him to, or Fred, whatever. Just trying to be in the moment with him. The hardest place I've ever had to stay in Alcoholics Anonymous is not in a meeting when I was new. It's right here, right now, with you. Because if God's will is for me to be filled with him, so that he can love you through me, if that's really my job, then I got to be present. I'll go back to step 9 and then I'll close. There's a couple of amends that I made that really helped me, really got me to understand kind of what I'm trying to express tonight. And the first one was this thing. I was in a sales contest, and I don't know how you guys are, right? I mean, there are any salesmen in here? It's an AA meeting. Come on, there's like salesmen everywhere, right? Real estate people? Yeah, okay. So it was a sales contest, right? And I don't know about you, I just know about me, and when I'm in a sales contest, I don't want to win, I have to win, right? Second place is first place of all the losers, right, in my head, right? So I gotta win. So I'm in this sales contest, and I'm doing really well, and it was about average sales, and so I knew in order to get this victory, I needed to start lying on this contract. Customer wasn't sure he was going to buy, and I needed this new sale. So I went into his office and I lied to him, looked him right in the eye and lied to him. Told him he had to buy some stuff he didn't really need. And I'm sober a few months. And I go through this thing and I get to my A step with Joe a couple of months later, and I know it's coming, man. Like, I know it's coming, right? I was like, oh, man. So I call my boss and I tell her, hey, this is what I did, because Joe told me that I didn't just violate the customer-vendor relationship, I lied to my company. I was representing them, and I was representing them dishonestly in the marketplace. So we handled it that way. She said, if he calls up and he's upset, I'll tell him you and I never had this conversation. If he sues, I guess we'll just deal with it. Okay. She goes, why don't you tell him that at renewal time, it's smaller. It's a smaller deal this year. We have some different packages, and you don't have to buy what you bought last year. And I was like, hey, that's a pretty... No, that's a lie too. I can't really do that yet. So I went to Joe and I called him up, different Joe, not my sponsor. And I called him up and I said, hey, do you got a few minutes? He said, yeah. I swing over, and so I went into his office. He said, are you all right? You sound a little shaky on the phone. I said, well, yeah, I'm all right. And he said, what are you here for? And I said, look, I lied to you on last year's contract. And I owe you $750. And that may not sound like a lot to a lot of people in this room, but in 1991, when I was 24 years old, in a new city, starting a new job, that was a lot of money to me. And I said, I don't have it. What I have is $250, and I'll give you that, and in 6 weeks I'll get another commission check, and I'll come back in and give you the balance. And he said, why are you here? And I was like, well, I stole $750. Like, what didn't you just hear, right? He's like, no, I got what you did. And I understand what you're trying to do. What I want to know is, why are you trying to do it? And I started to cry in this guy's office. And I don't really cry. Well, I didn't then. I do all the time now. I didn't then. And I said, Joe, I'm a drunk. And I met these people, and they're trying to teach me a new way to live. And one of the things they're trying to teach me about is honesty and restitution. And so because I lied to you, I have to come back here and I have to look you in the eye and I have to tell you I lied to you and I have to pay you back. And he's like, can I tell you a story? And I was like, sure. He said, when I was a kid, my brother and I used to go out, we used to pick peas, and we had this basket on our hips. And we used to get into this motion, you just go and go and go, and you're almost unconscious, Mike, and you're just picking peas like a banshee. Older guy, very old guy. He said there's a few rules, and the first one was like you had to stay in your row, so the farmer knew which rows were picked. And the second rule was there were 2 bells that rang. The first one to let you know that there were 15 minutes left to pick, and the second bell meant that the pickup truck was going to be out in the road, and you better get in the pickup truck because it is a long walk back to the farmhouse. So he said, one day I'm out there picking, and this guy comes out. He said, I could see him along the horizon. There was railroad tracks, and when the train went through, I saw him jump off the train. And he had one of those cowboy hats on, those 10-gallon cowboy hats. And I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. And he said, a second or two later, I looked down the row, and there's this guy, and he's in my row, and he's picking my peas. And it just throws me off, and I can't get my rhythm back. And he keeps picking peas and putting them in his hat. He said, and suddenly the bell rang. And I just inside of me, Mike, I just raged at this guy. Like if he hadn't thrown me off, I could have filled this basket. There was a line in the basket, and for every basket I filled, my brother and I, we got a quarter for doing it. And now I'm not going to get my quarter on this basket because this guy threw me off because I mentally couldn't quit thinking about him as he might row. And I start walking back to the road, and I hear, "Hey, kid!" Joe says he turns around, and there's this hobo with this 10-gallon hat of peas. He walks over to him, and he dumps the hat of peas into Joe's basket, and he fills it up to the line. He gets a quarter. And Joe tells me that this hobo pokes him in the chest and says, "Hey, kid, remember that. Somebody gave you a hat full of peas one day, and you didn't ask for it, and you got one anyway. And someday somebody's going to come knocking on your door, and they're going to need a hat full of peas, and you better give them one because somebody gave you one once, kid." And Joe says, "You know what I mean, Mike?" And I said, "No, I have no idea. Peas? He said, "I'm giving you a hat full of peas, Mike. I don't want your money. I don't want your money. You can come here all you want and drop off checks. I'm never taking them." He says, "As a matter of fact, if you're ever looking for a career change, we could use an honest guy like you around here." That's not how that's supposed to be. An honest guy? I'm the admitted thief, right? And he said, "You may not want to be in our industry, and that's perfectly okay. If you ever need a letter of recommendation, I want you to call me. I'll have my secretary write it up. I'll sign it. You can pick it up at the front desk." Like, that's not supposed to happen. He stands up and he gets out from his desk and he does this. Stands in front of me and does this. And I stood up, and this guy gave me, I'm a big guy, he was bigger than me. Stood up, he gives me a hug. And I remember thinking two things. This is like incredible. And the second thing I thought is, this guy just gave you a 750 break. Do not get snot on his tie. Like, that would be horrible for this kid. Be a bad ending to this story. But he grabs my shoulder and he pulls me back and he goes, "Remember that, Mike, I gave you a hat full of peas. And someday somebody's going to come knocking on your door, Mike, and they're going to need a hat full of peas, and you better give them one. Because somebody gave you one once and you didn't even ask for it." And he said, "By the way, one last thing." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "God is bigger than you, and he's bigger than me. And he sure the hell is bigger than $750. I threw beer battles at a priest one time when I was in college. I humiliated him in front of classmates. Just belittled this poor man who was very, very gracious and kind to me one evening. And I couldn't find him on my A-step. I don't know how you make amends for that. I was drunk, and along the back end of the bar were these empty beer bottles. And I felt like he had humiliated me. He hadn't, but I felt like he had. And in my world, that means you have, right? And I was drunk. And I poked this good man in the chest, and I said, "Father, why aren't you out there dancing at this dance we're at?" And he said, "What?" And I said, "Oh, you know what, Father? It's probably been a long time since you've been with a woman. Why don't I help you out?" There was a gal walking by. She had red hair, and I said, "Father really likes redheads, and it's been a long time since he's been with a woman. Why don't you take him out on the dance floor and dance with him?" "Mike, what are you doing?" "Oh, redhead? You don't like red?" Brunette was walking by. I said, "Why don't you take Father out on the dance floor?" He cut me off. He said, "Mike, stop it." And I reached around and took an armful of these empty beer bottles and I threw them at this priest's feet. And I said, "Father, when I tell you to dance, I mean dance." And I humiliated this guy in front of the students. Humiliated this guy in front of his fellow administrators. I don't know how you make amends for that. But I found him one day. I looked around for him for quite a while, couldn't find him. You ever have somebody like that? You look and you look and you look and you just can't find him. Couldn't find him. So one day I did. I was calling around, and one thing led to another, and through a series of odd events, I found this guy and called him up and I said, "Father, this is Michael Donnelly. I don't know if you remember me or not." He's like, "Oh yeah, I remember you." And I said, "I'm thinking back on this, and I don't know how to make this right to you." I said, "But I feel really bad about it, and I'm sorry, and whatever you want me to do to make this right, Father, I'll do it." And he said, "Mike, why are you calling? What's going on?" "Well, I just know I did something really bad and I want to make it right." "No, what's going on?" I said, "Well, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in our program, we try to make restitutions for the wrongs we've done. And I don't know how to make this right. Do you have any ideas? And he said, yeah, I got an idea. He said, I have a friend of mine who's in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll tell you what, if you can ever share this story, share it. The humility of this guy. Some punk kid humiliates him and he wants me to share it. And this is what he said. If you can ever share this story to help someone else work that program that you guys have, share it. Don't worry about what it makes me look like. Share it. He said, and then that night, if you wouldn't mind praying for me and my family, we could use your prayers. And so tonight, when I get on my knees and I thank my God for my day of sobriety today, I'm going to ask him to bless Father Phil and his family. You know, I don't know how this thing works. I just have some ideas. And one of the ideas that I've had for a while now is that I came to Alcoholics Anonymous without power. And I got that from our book. The number one thing I lack in my life is power. And these steps, when done as best to our ability that we can do them, something happens within us that is absolutely unbelievable. It's beyond our ability to make it happen. It has to be miraculous. It has to be the grace of God. When I was 7 years old, I'll close with this. My dad had just passed away and my mom and I were walking through Toys R Us. Anybody remember Lost in Space? Right? Yeah. So I always wanted to be Will Robinson, you know? Always wanted to be Will Robinson. He had that robot, you know, it was so cool. And so we're walking through Toys R Us, and it's around Thanksgiving, and I come around an end unit, there's a corner, a display, and there are giant robot toys, right? And I just immediately turned into an amoeba on the floor, and I'm like, please, Mom, buy me one of these, you know? And my mom lied to me and said if I was a good boy, Santa would bring one for Christmas. Well, I wasn't a good boy, and Santa brought one anyway. That's a good Irish mom. And I opened this thing up at 7 years old, and I about had a heart attack. I loved this thing. The couch was one planet. The chair was another. The stairs down to the basement were going into a crevice in the moon. Like, I played with this thing like crazy. And somewhere around the 4th or 5th of January, my mom went off to Woolworths and bought D batteries. She shoved them in the butt end of this thing, and it lit up like the 4th of July. And I thought I had fun before the batteries. Holy cow. Holy cow. You pull this thing out of the back of it and it rolls forward and you push a button. You push another button and it comes back the other way. You push the red button. Danger, Will Robinson. Danger, Will Robinson. It was unbelievable. See, to me, that's Alcoholics Anonymous. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, batteries not included. That robot had all the potential in it that it had from its manufacturer long before it ever got its batteries. It just couldn't utilize them because it had no power to utilize them. I think in AA, when we work these steps, 1 through 9 gives us the batteries, 10, 11, and 12 keeps them charged, and perhaps we can do what we were always designed by our manufacturer to do. Love the people that he put in our life. Whether it's newcomers in a meeting, whether it's our spouses, whether it's our children. All I know is that I'm supposed to love people. If you're out here tonight and it's your first meeting, welcome. But I want to say something to the person who thinks it's their last meeting. In a group this size, somebody came here tonight going, last time. I'm done. If you're in that mode, if you feel that, if you've got 1 foot out and 1 foot in, no matter how long you've been here, 2 days or 55 plus years, I think where our book ends. Wherever you fall in the middle of that, if tonight you're thinking, maybe this won't work for me, don't go yet. Take one more crack at finding somebody to walk you through that book. Because if you walk through that book, if my experience can help you in any way, take it and do this. An imperfect idiot can find a loving God who can keep him sober. He can't keep himself sober. But a loving God can. If you do the work, you can get all he wants to give you if you're willing to take it. God bless you all. Let's love our families and each other. Thank you for having me.